How do you beat a team that hasn't lost a game in 11 billion games, that hasn't lost a home game this decade? I have some thoughts.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Also, thank you to everybody for getting us up over 5,000 subscribers. We're trying to get to 6,000 and then to 7,000, constantly growing. So if you haven't subscribed, please do. Take the opportunity to go down and subscribe now. If you have, tell a friend. And if you listen on one of the other mediums like iTunes or the audio version of the podcast, go to the YouTube podcast channel and subscribe. That would help us out very much. And I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time ticketing app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right. How do you beat a team that doesn't lose? How do you beat a team that everybody that comes in goes home sad? That you have the tallest of tall orders. How do you beat that team? And I've got some thoughts, and there's some fairly simple things that need to be done to beat a team. And I've looked at teams that beat Kirby Smart's teams when he was the defensive coordinator at Alabama, the Bo Wallace, the Chad Kelly type stuff. I've looked at Steven Garcia. I've looked at how Ole Miss could get by on this team. And I come up with these three things. They're pretty simple things, actually. This is a Jaxson Dart and Quinshon Judkins game. For Ole Miss to win the game, these two players have to go off and provide a special level performance. And number two, Ole Miss needs to put together their first complete game of the season. They haven't done it. This now seems like as good a time as any to do it. And the third of all, the Rebels must believe they're going to win and not just hope they're going to win. When you just hope you're going to win, all of a sudden when that first bad thing happens, it turns into an avalanche against you. You have to avoid that. You have to avoid those mistakes because as Brian Kelly for LSU told Jaden Daniels, it's not about perfection. He's not demanding perfection. What he's demanding is excellence. And you need to understand the difference between excellence and perfection, because perfection, it can smother you. It can be overtaking. But excellence in doing that, it's like standing up and standing with a good posture and doing the things that need to be done. The confidence-wise, it's a completely different thing. But when you look at Jaxson Dart and Quinshon Judkins in this football game, this is a massive game for Jaxson Dart. I've talked about Jaxson Dart's legacy for 2 weeks at this point. And the reason is the fact that you need a special quarterback performance to beat Kirby Smart means that this is going to go down on the annals of history if Ole Miss can do it. Regardless, even if Jaxson Dart isn't viewed by the time he leaves Ole Miss as the greatest of all-time quarterbacks, this performance would still be at a next level. Matt Corral didn't do it. He didn't do anything like this. Chad Kelly did, and you see he's not listed on the greatest of all time. He just beat Alabama once. Bo Wallace beat Alabama once, and he's the all-time leader in total offense, but he's not on the greatest of all-time list. But to get there, this is the resume that Jaxson Dart is starting to put together. First of all, he has 3 fourth quarter come-from-behind wins this season. That's absurd. That's already above a level. Like John Darnell was the cardiac quarterback at Ole Miss in 1989 when he won 2 out of 4 fourth quarter come from behind games. You had the pass in 1989 but from John Darnell to Reed Hines to beat Georgia in Oxford. I was at that game. You also had a pass into the end zone to beat LSU that fell incomplete, that LSU won that game. And then he also beat Tulane that year. Good grief. It's kind of interesting, the coincidence of going back to the Tulane and the Georgia type stuff. But the Georgia game, Jaxson Dart was able to get past it when John Darnell lost that game. He's the most clutch quarterback that Ole Miss has ever had, period. I thought going into a couple of games ago that maybe it was Eli. I was like, no, not Eli. This guy can do things a little bit differently than everybody else. And if you look at his numbers, he's 160 of 244, 2,467 yards, 16 touchdowns, 4 picks. That averages out. If he just does what he normally does, he's going to throw for about 3,300 yards, maybe somewhere in that ballpark, 3,200 yards. He's going to throw for a little bit over 20 touchdowns, and his interception range is going to be at about 5 or 6. This is simply one of the best seasons in Ole Miss football history. And here's the catch. If that number's on the high level, if Jaxson Dart has that high level type performance against Georgia, against Louisiana Monroe, and against Mississippi State, which I'm not expecting him to play the whole time against Louisiana Monroe, but let's say he combines in those games for 900 or 1,000 yards passing. You're looking at 3,500 yards in passing yards. That means that his 600 yards or whatever it is running the ball, what he's on pace for, that's going to put him at 4,200 yards-ish in total offense, which is an unbelievably special year. And if you look at the number of touchdowns he has running the football, his touchdowns responsible rate is going to be right around 30. Very, very special, very heady stuff. But this is the game. This is the win. This is the notch on his belt where he gets to say, okay, I'm here. And let's say Jaxson Dart goes 11-1, whether or not he makes the playoff. If he just goes 11-1 this year, let's say he goes the 11-1 and hits the Orange Bowl against Penn State and beats Penn State, wins 12 games. Next season, he comes back to Ole Miss because it looks like he is going to come back to Ole Miss. And he leads Ole Miss to a playoff game, a home playoff game in that first round, which will be the biggest game in the history of the program. If that starts happening, the biggest game in the history of the program starts happening repeatedly, all of a sudden you're like, okay, this guy's special. This guy's doing something a little bit different. And I think anybody at that point that wants to put anybody as the greatest of all time is just playing nostalgia. They're not playing real. Because if Jaxson Dart comes back after a 12-1, leads Ole Miss to the playoffs, and he's the leading passer, the leading quarterback runner, and the leading total offense man, and is in the top 10 in rushing as well, yeah, even the stats bear out that he's the greatest of all time at Ole Miss. That is the trajectory he's on, but he needs the win this weekend as well. Now, the other thing is Quinshon Judkins, and running the ball against Georgia has always been laborious. But you need to do it. Just like against the Alabama teams, you need to do it even if it's not working, because you need the linebackers to at least to step up for a play action fake and to take that seriously. And Cody Schrader ran the ball on Georgia. Jarquez Hunter ran the ball on Georgia. Teams have ran the ball on Georgia this year in ways that they hadn't done previously. Like I said, there's no Jalen Carter. There's no Jordan Davis on that defense at the moment. Now, it's still 4- and 5-star players, but it's not the Georgia team defensively that they've had over the last couple of years. Now, this offensive unit is probably a better unit, but we'll talk about that in the watch for tomorrow a little bit. But Quinshon Judkins is on pace for 1,200 yards. If he can have another day similar to what he had against Texas A&M, because know that front seven that Texas A&M have was more talented than what Georgia has. Absolutely nuts to think about. Absolutely true. If he can have a similar type game, I'm not even talking about touchdowns. Not even talking about touchdowns. I'm talking about him just going 24 carries for 100 yards, where he's averaging 4 yards a clip running the football. Ole Miss is going to be in a position to win the game because the offense is working at that point. Those two players, Quinshon Judkins and Jaxson Dart, if they come out and have him-type performances, I'm not even counting Tre Harris, just those two players, Ole Miss is going to be in a good position to pull off the upset if they do the other stuff that is going to be required as well. I do want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Ole Miss is currently an 11.5-point underdog to the Georgia Bulldogs. The over-under right now is at 58.5. If either one of those numbers suits your fancy, head on over to FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, it's an official partner of the NFL. College football season is here, and this season Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff live each Friday. Locked On will go live at 11 a.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel, including this one. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, the conference rivalry games, and go in depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College football hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it. So let's talk about this real quick. Now, we talked about how it's going to be important for Ole Miss's stars to be at stars. That is going to be massively important, just like it always is when you've played these Kirby Smart defensive teams. Your dudes have to be your dudes. Ole Miss does not beat Alabama twice if Laquan Treadwell is not on the outside making plays. Period. It just doesn't happen. So Ole Miss needs Quinshon Judkins. Ole Miss needs Tre Harris. And Ole Miss needs Jaxson Dart to play like the stars that they are. I think Jaxson Dart is potentially the best quarterback in the SEC. I think Quinshon Judkins is potentially the best running back in the SEC. And I think Tre Harris is potentially the best wide receiver in the SEC. Those three need to play like all of those are the best in the SEC to be successful against a Georgia defense that is not going to beat themselves. And they have maximum talent on that side of the ball. Period. Now, in this game, it's also going to be important that Ole Miss actually puts a complete game together. This full season, Ole Miss has not put together a complete game. There's been a massive lull in the middle of the game. They've been red hot to start every game this season, and they've been red hot to close every game this season. But in the middle part of the game, especially the middle 8 minutes of the game, but we'll say the second and third quarter, there's been a lull. If you look at the scoring, Ole Miss is somewhere around 120 to 30 or 40 in the first quarter, about the same thing in the fourth quarter. But in the middle two quarters, it's like 60 to 60, 65 to 65. And it's very evenly matched. Now, overall, Ole Miss is outscoring their opponents like 320 or something to 200. I mean, they're completely winning the scoring competition. But Ole Miss needs to avoid that lull this game. You got away with it against LSU because LSU's defense was not very good. They're getting a little bit better, but they're not very good. You did not get away with that against Alabama, even though that lull, because you couldn't crank back up in the second half and the fourth quarter of the game because the talent level was so much greater. And that same problem exists against Georgia. The talent level is going to be a problem. So Ole Miss needs to consistently build over the course of the game. I do hope that Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weis Jr. come out with that great script and do what they need to go down to do and score the touchdown and put the pressure on the Georgia Bulldogs. But once the pressure is put on them, Ole Miss needs to hold it through as long as they possibly can. Needs to be a situation to where there is just relentless and it never lets up. Because if you get to the second quarter and you're up by 2 touchdowns, let's say Ole Miss is winning 17-3, much like they were against the LSU Bayou Bengals last year. All of a sudden, Georgia scores a touchdown 70-10. That place gets juiced and that defense gets riled up. They get a couple of 3 and outs, and you look up and all of a sudden you're down 24-17. You didn't do necessarily anything different. You didn't do anything catastrophic. You just allowed the avalanche that can happen to happen. So it's going to be important for Ole Miss to put a complete game together, both offense and defense and special teams. Special teams has been a problem for Ole Miss football. And if you ask me what would be the position this weekend that will get Ole Miss beat, it's probably a special teams play. But offensively and defense, one's been good, the other's been okay. One's been good, the other's been bad. You don't even have a situation where they're both just okay. Ole Miss needs both of them to be good. Not great. Not great. It's just like I said earlier in the day. You're coaching excellence, not perfection. Perfection is not attainable, and there's no sense even trying to do that. So play fast, do what you need to do, keep pressure on him. Do not do things that underdogs do in this game. Ole Miss can win this game. Okay, this is the thing that I think everybody needs to understand. Ole Miss can win this game. They can. There's a reason the line is as low as it is. Ole Miss can win this game. Now, there's a difference between can, should, and will. Okay? But can Ole Miss win this game? Yes, absolutely. But to do that, you need to play in a way that is different than the line dictates that you are. In my rule, if you are a 10-plus point underdog, you are it's an upset if you win. So if Ole Miss beats Georgia, it's an upset because Ole Miss is 11.5-point dog. But in those games, mentally, he has to say, well, we have to let it all hang out. You hear that. It's a free shot. You just get to let it all hang out. And you get to do all this stuff. But you have to be careful against Alabama and Georgia. And Hugh Freeze has learned this against Alabama. Heck, Lane Kiffin hopefully has learned this against Alabama too. Whenever you go for a fourth down and you don't get it, it is such a momentum jump, it can engulf you. You can't have major momentum swings this game. We talk about playing consistently the whole level. That means playing clean. That means no penalties. Do not turn the football over, and do not go for a fourth down on your side of the field. Do not do that, because otherwise it just gives adrenaline to the crowd, and all of a sudden they get going and Georgia goes bang, 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 and it's down by 3 scores. Ask Florida a couple of weeks ago. They decided to go for it in their own territory. That Georgia did stop them. They did not get it. And all of a sudden, Florida's down by 3 touchdowns in a game they were playing pretty well in. You have to guard against the Avalanche. You have to play aggressive. You have to do all of that stuff, but you also have to play smart. And sometimes it's smart to have every possession end in a kick. And this is a situation where if you just do not give them momentum, make them create every bit of the momentum, put it on them to do it, you're going to be in good shape, as opposed to letting it all hang out and going for it and doing stuff like that, because then the team gets to play like that, up and down, up and down, up and down. No, you want to be as robotic as humanly possible in a road game and not give the home team the ability to take over the game. Because Georgia, if you let them, will completely envelop you. It will completely engulf you. It'll be like a wave going over the top of you. Georgia has that talent. Georgia has that scheme. They have everything. They're the 2-time defending national champion for a reason. So you have to balance the let it all hang out and playing loose and going over there with a free shot, and not being so over anxious that you get yourself beat by doing silly things. This is actually a very important game for Lane Kiffin coaching. Everybody wants to talk about Lane's maturity and the way things work. This game is going to be important for that. There's once a game right now that Lane Kiffin just can't help it, and he goes for it in his own territory, whenever there's no chance the other team can drive the field. Let's see how this game looks. Let's see how he does this game. Anyway, when we come back, we are going to talk about not hoping to win, believing you can win, and really believe that. And we're also going to touch betting lines a little bit as well. But right now, I do want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by the Game Time ticketing app. The Ole Miss Rebels are facing the Georgia Bulldogs Saturday at 6 p.m. Century Time. And just about every Ole Miss fan that I've talked to have said they're going. But it being the last minute, how can you purchase tickets? Try the Game Time ticketing app and see that getting last-minute tickets can actually be a pleasure. They have super specials for all types of event. But this week, we just care about football, right? We just care about the Ole Miss and Georgia game. So I'm going to bring up real quick, this is the get-in price around the Georgia game. It's up there. It's not cheap. But you can even see the view from your seats. You can see that on the seats. So there's no surprise. And the total all-in prices means that there's just no surprises and hidden fees as well. So download the Game Time app, create your account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Again, download the Game Time app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, for $20 off your first purchase. This is a great way for a last-minute trip to Athens to watch the Rebels play for what could be a pretty important game. So, on SiriusXM, whenever it comes out, because they are slow with the schedules for whatever reason, you'll check the Ole Miss Rebels versus the Georgia Bulldogs, 6 o'clock Saturday night. It's on ESPN, but it's also on Super Talk. But if you're outside the state of Mississippi and you want to listen to the soothing sounds of David Kellum, David Yellum, as we affectionately call him, you can check him out on SiriusXM. Once we have the channel, we will give that to you. But you can check out, search SXM on the app, Ole Miss Rebels, to find out what you need as well. All right, I hope everybody is having a great Tuesday. Seriously, this is pretty fantastic stuff. I'm getting fired up just talking about how Ole Miss can win this game. I can't imagine what it's like to be a player practicing this morning, getting ready for that game. They have everything on the table. You want to talk about being completely locked in? I imagine they're completely locked in at the moment as well. But when you look at this game, this is a situation you need to believe that you will win and not just hope that you will win. If you hope that you win, the first time something goes wrong, all of a sudden you fold and the level of play goes down a little bit and the other team just kind of steamrolls you. You have to believe that you can win, even after the fact. And I think this team is mature enough to handle exactly what's going on. And they're going to play their butts off the whole game to get ready. And they're going to look at the scoreboard at the end, as Hugh Freeze used to say, and they're going to determine what happens then. But you have to believe you can win. And why will you believe that you can win? And the first thing that I want to point out is this is not the same Georgia defense that we're used to. Now, it's still good. Kirby Smart still does a lot of the same stuff. The difference is, instead of 3 yards per rush, it's 3.6 or something like that. But this defense is good, but it's not like Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis good, like the 2019, 2020, that defenses that they got built up to where they could just suffocate you and treat you like a boa constrictor. This is not that Georgia defense. This is a Georgia offensive team, and you're going to be facing an offensive team without Brock Bowers, most likely. So when you look at this is, we put up last week Texas A&M's defense where they were number 1 in sacks and number 1 in TFLs. Well, Georgia's number 68 in sacks with 19. That is about 2 per game. They are number 87 in tackles for loss with 47. Like I said, this Georgia defense is not quite like what we're used to. Like I said, they're still good. They're still 4- and 5-star players. They're just not quite what they were. Offensively, they're pretty good, and we're going to talk about them tomorrow on the What to Watch For episode. Just to put this in perspective, this is the Ole Miss defense. Ole Miss is number 5 in the country in sacks with 31, which is 12 more than Georgia has. And they're number 13 in the country with 66 TFLs, which is a full 20 more than Georgia has. Absolutely nuts stuff. Everybody on Ole Miss's offense should feel at least a little bit confident they should be able to make it work, because Georgia's front 7 is not as good as Texas A&M's. Still good players, okay? We're talking relative margins here. Still good players. But if you can put up 500 yards against A&M, Now, Georgia is probably better on the back end, and Tre Harris is going to probably have to work a little bit more. And this is a big game, I think, for Caden Prieskorn and Jordan Watkins, as Ole Miss has 3 receivers over 600 yards receiving. This Georgia defense looks like it can be got if you're ready to go. Now, you still have to execute. You still have to play clean. You have to do a lot of stuff that is at the high end of your game. Props to Georgia for basically creating a team where that has to happen. For them to lose, the other team has to play really, really well. And that's coaching. That's Kirby Smart. But this is not the Georgia team that has been the Georgia teams in the past. They've won, 26 consecutive games, and they haven't lost a home game since 2019 against South Carolina. Will Muschamp, I believe, is on the staff at Georgia, I think was the last person to beat Georgia. Absolutely nuts. And Carson Beck and that offense has a chance to be really good, and this is the best offensive line that Ole Miss is going to face. You're going to have your work cut out for you, just like every time you play the Georgia Bulldogs. But can Georgia be beaten? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Ole Miss can beat this team. Not saying they should beat them, not saying they will beat them, but they can. And knowing that, and knowing your self-confidence, and knowing how it resides with you internally, should get the juices flowing for this weekend. I mean, it has a chance to be really, really freaking cool. If you look at the betting line, Ole Miss currently an 11.5 point underdog. The over-under is at 58.5 points. And that's normal. Okay. I mean, you're an underdog. And honestly, 2 more points. If it gets down below 10 points, I don't even consider an upset anymore. But as it sits right now, if Ole Miss beats Georgia, it's an upset. But if you look at the stats, 59% of the bets on Ole Miss. 51% of the money is on Ole Miss, minus 11.5. Now, the money's kind of about where Vegas wants it at the moment, so I don't anticipate the line moving that much. But you can see a lot of confidence. Vegas was very complimentary to Ole Miss in this line. The public is betting Ole Miss very complimentary. And if Ole Miss can win this game, this is a program changer. This is a program changer. We start legitimately talking playoffs if next week this time we're getting ready to go into Louisiana Monroe with 1 loss. Because I genuinely think if Ole Miss beats Georgia, Ole Miss is jumping Bama and Texas. Georgia has too much respect for that not to happen from everybody. And I do think there's a chance that should all this go down, that Ole Miss is like 4th in the playoff, and then after the championship game, they get TCU'd. I do think that's a possibility as well. But if the playoff committee punishes Ole Miss because of 1 bad half of football, that would kind of be a shame. Anyway, thanks to everyone for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. We'll come back tomorrow with a What to Watch For episode, and we'll talk a little bit about the Georgia offense and the Ole Miss defense and all of that good stuff as we get ready for the Ole Miss game of the century. Should be pretty fantastic. Anyway, we'll see you tomorrow. Hotty toddy.